Hi everyone, I'm Priya Walker.
And I'm Naomi Drego. And before we begin our talk today, we'd like to start by asking you one simple question.
So raise your hand if you identify as a feminist.
All right, interesting. Not everyone raised their hand. Well, our job here today is to convince you why you should choose to identify with this term.
Let's start with the simple game of true or false. Take some time to think about each statement. First, all feminists hate men.
All feminists are violent.
Only women can be feminists.
Feminism is detrimental to men.
Believe it or not, the answer to each of these assumptions is false.
But before we get into anything else, let's take a look at the dictionary definition of the word feminism. The Oxford English Dictionary defines the word feminism as the advocacy for women's rights on the grounds of equality between the sexes.
But for many people, this original concept of feminism has morphed into something completely different than what the word actually entails. I know that there was certainly a period of time in my life where I was hesitant to label myself as a feminist.
I didn't want to be seen as an angry man-hater or called out because I supposedly thought women were better than men. I didn't want to associate myself with a word that had become so hated and in turn run the risk that I might be hated too. And for some of you in the audience, this might be how you feel right now.
But what I didn't realize back then is that feminism, when stripped down to its bare bones, isn't any of these things. It isn't man-hating. You can love men and still be a feminist. It isn't violence. You can be as soft or as loud as you like and still consider yourself a feminist. It isn't some exclusive club limited to women. It's a movement that includes all. And it isn't detrimental to the lives of men. It isn't tearing down one group to raise up another. When we advocate for women's rights on the ground of equality between the sexes, the world becomes a better, fairer place for everyone.
But before we move on, let's just take a look at what some modern feminists may look like. These people are feminists. These guys are feminists too. These women, they look like great feminists to me. That man's a feminist. And wait, you've guessed it, this old couple, they're feminists too. So, by now, you've probably caught on to what our first point is. Regardless of any personal traits or characteristics that you might display, you can and should choose to identify with this term.
But today, we want to move beyond this perspective of feminism and talk about a new term we hear cropping up all over the place: social media, books, TV shows, and that is intersectional feminism. Now, whether you've heard this term before or for the first time from us today, many of you may be wondering why we need to complicate things more. We already have feminism, equality between the genders. What could possibly be the benefit of throwing another term in the pot? Isn't feminism enough?
Well, intersectional feminism gets into the nitty-gritty details we may not be comfortable with addressing normally. If feminism is the bigger picture, intersectional feminism is the little zoom button that allows us to go in and see in finer detail. For example, let's just take a look at this. We know that sexism exists. However, we're also aware that racism is a struggle that many people face. When the two are experienced at the same time, the effects are amplified. Therefore, a woman of color is likely to face double the prejudice than a non-woman of color.
So, for example, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women will experience violence at higher rates than non-Aboriginal women. In fact, they're 32 times more likely to be hospitalized as a result of family violence-related assaults. Now, our point here is that all of us have multiple identities, and it is impossible to separate one's experiences as a woman from their experiences as a person of color.
Similarly, we can apply this to all aspects of life, to the minorities such as LGBT women, to disabled women, to all women of different socioeconomic classes. According to the International Women's Development Agency, in Timor-Leste, class and socioeconomic discrimination intersect with sexism making it harder for poorer women to get elected because of the high cost of campaigning in this newly democratized nation. Additionally, their research also shows that in Cambodia, women with disabilities are likely to face higher rates of violence from immediate family members, as well as experience more controlling behaviors from their partners.
Yeah, so it's a movement that includes all women, women of all races, all sexualities, all abilities, all financial standings. A movement that fights for all women by acknowledging that different types of prejudice are not isolated. So to quote Audre Lorde, a feminist, civil rights activist, and writer, there is no such thing as a single-issue struggle because we do not live single-issue lives. Ultimately, everyone reaps the benefits of intersectionality as part of women's rights, which contributes to a fairer world for all. Now, it's important to note that while the term may appear new, it's actually been around for a while. Intersectional feminism was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, when she noticed that gender and race were often looked at as completely separate issues. But today, we know that they build upon each other when it comes to discrimination.
So now that we know different types of prejudice intersect together, our term has expanded to include this. Our world has been increasingly diversifying since 1989, and we need the language and movements to match this. Hence why the term intersectional feminism has become so prominent recently. But what can we do to be good intersectional feminists?
So for us, being a part of the digital generation, we began to follow many feminist social media accounts in the hopes that we might one day enact everything they posted about. However, we began to notice two traits across the board that unsettled us.
Well, firstly, it had to do with privilege. Whenever someone in the comments section would bring up the idea of privilege, specifically white privilege, the account owners would immediately do one of three things: block, report, or shut down. They would deny the existence of said privilege and see it as a somewhat personal attack on themselves rather than just a word. They interpreted the word privilege to have some sort of aura of negative connotations all around it.
But to be a good intersectional feminist, you need to acknowledge that privilege exists. Certain characteristics that people possess give them a better advantage in society, whether that's being white, being straight, being financially well off, being able-bodied. It's not something to get ashamed of or something to get angry about whenever someone brings it up. Instead, when we acknowledge it, we get closer to dismantling it. When we acknowledge it, we can advocate for those without it. So you should do what you can to voice support for the causes of others and stand with them, which is what we call solidarity. This might be as simple as sharing a post on Facebook, or something as large as attending marches for a variety of causes. Because your privilege makes you more likely to be listened to in society, you can give this voice to the minority groups that really need it.
Secondly, whenever a woman would try and speak up about her own life experiences, whether it had been struggles she experienced as a woman living with a disability, or prejudice she faced as a woman part of the LGBTIQ community, she would always be shut down, the account owners believing that their own personal life experiences, struggles, and whatever events they went through were of utmost importance.
But in reality, to be a good intersectional feminist, you need to be willing to listen to the voices of the diverse women around you. Instead of speaking over them or speaking for them, amplify their voices. No experience is too small or too insignificant.
We're constantly learning, every single day, every single one of us, and it is when we stop and listen to the diverse voices around us, our feminism becomes more enriched and informed.
So in summary, intersectional feminism in practice requires us to work together to understand and recognize our own areas of privilege and move towards dismantling oppressive systems.
It requires the acknowledgement that we are not perfect, but every single day that we move forward, we can slowly but surely continue to better ourselves.
So, to quote Audre Lorde once more, "I am not free while any woman is unfree. even when her shackles are very different from my own.
Your feminism should advocate for the rights of every single woman around you. But you have to choose what kind of feminist you want to be. The future is intersectional,
And you can and should be a part of it.